Let's go to line number one. Good morning, Chris. You're on the air.
Good morning, Batty. How you doing today?
Not too bad, thanks. How about you?
Oh, I'm doing good. Trying to stay productive and focused on good things that can help out our community.
Let's do it. Where are we helping this morning?
Well, we're talking about wind. So, I think there's been a lot of discussion on the show as to the merits or the cost or the detriments of the wind to ammonia projects. There has been, I think, less discussion overall about the merits of wind in and of itself. I think there's a lot of people that would say, well, we have climate goals, we want to achieve them, we want to keep developing our energy industry, we want more jobs, we want more opportunity, so there must be some value to building out wind. And so, maybe there is. And so I think that sort of behooves us to look at grids that have already built a bunch of wind. And so for a moment, I thought you were going to say that we're on the third day of Dunkelflaut, which is a German word for when the wind is not blowing. And that's what's happening in Germany right now. They are on the third day of it. And they have 70 gigawatts of wind that could be on their grid at any given time. And currently it's producing 0.2 gigawatts. A total collapse of that energy source. And what that has done to Germany has made their prices for electricity absolutely skyrocket to basically being comparable to when Russia invaded Ukraine, just to get back to the geopolitics of it all, I guess. So right now, this afternoon, I suppose, Germans will be paying between 800 and 1,000 euro per megawatt hour. The average is like 500, so still incredibly high. And that doesn't include the subsidies that they pay for the wind, which is about 45 euros a megawatt hour. That's what the government is paying, not what ratepayers are paying. That those thousands and the 800, that's ratepayers. And and Germany is supposed to be our partner in energy, and we are trying to emulate them and work with them. And it seems that too much wind can be really, really damaging to a grid. Certainly, if we're looking at Germany.
Well, wind was part of the conversation before it was part of a ban or a moratorium here in this province because we had an isolated grid, right? Engineers told me, not me guessing numbers or pulling them out of a hat, is that we could only absorb about 10% input with the isolated grid. With an integrated grid, it increased more. But an over-reliance on anything has seemingly been bad for the grid. It's a blended issue that seems to work best for jurisdictions who have hit the sweet spot.
Yep, and that 10% number is I think pretty sensible, and that is what Hydro intends to buy. So I do actually appreciate their kind of policy decisions on that matter. They're not offering a blank check to all of the wind producers to that we're going to soak up all their excess power. I think they only want to buy kind of an average of around 120 or 140 megawatt hours. Which is about 10% of our winter demand. And that sort of works pretty sensibly as what's called a reservoir extender. So, the Muskrat Falls or Cat Arm or Beta Square are all reservoir hydro. And so if we have a bit of wind, 10%-ish or whatever, that kind of gives us 10% more reservoir. So it extends the value of that reservoir. Now, I think a lot of people are hoping that the wind will be able to push our thermal generation off, but that basically won't happen. And Hydro has said as much, that we're not planning on closing Holyrood anytime soon. And I think if people do want Holyrood to close, then we need to kind of get past the wind or the variable energy conversation and get back to a baseload conversation. But that's a very, very expensive conversation to have.
Yeah, for sure. There was an interesting graph, I guess maybe you sent it to me this morning, about the cost, what they call the Green Energy Act in Ontario, and the reference to the inflation-adjusted dollars, then the capital cost of their entire CANDU, which is the nuclear fleet. So it's $62 billion inside the Green Energy Act to accommodate solar and wind. Look, solar and wind input costs have come down to earth a little bit, but it's the impact of the actual eventual cost for how much has to be installed to provide the amount of power required. Look, I was never really big on the nuclear energy conversation until the world evolved into the small modular reactors, because we don't need massive facilities. We don't need 3 Mile Island. But we really could, with a blended approach to how our grid operates. I don't know why that's been rejected so out of hand. I know legislation has to be amended, but that's an easy fix inside the House of Assembly. And I guess they've landed on a 150 megawatt generator at Holyrood. Using what type of fuel? Not really sure. They're talking about maybe using the cleanest available, which would be some of the renewable fuels coming from places like Brea. But yeah, it's just been seemingly dismissed out of hand for reasons that maybe I don't understand the issue, but because it's firm, reliable output, apparently that's a problem. Not sure how that constitutes a problem. And back to one point you made that I want to pick up on before I forget. The way that these onshore wind proposals, if they ever come to pass, how they interact with the grid, the purchase of power from us, the purchase of power from them when is required on both ends, we don't even know how that's going to work. We have no idea what kind of cost. We have no idea exactly what kind of megawattage we'll be looking at. So there's a lot, people can talk about the environmental sensitivities, but even in the dollars and cents world, there's a lot we don't really understand at this moment in time.
So we don't know the cost. That's correct. There are apparently 2 people applying for power purchase agreements, so we may get an idea of what that cost may be soon. We do have a bit of an idea about the megawattage. Hydro has put in place a requirement for any industrial customer to have, I guess the term is fencing behind the grid, so that there would only be. They would need to provide some amount of their own infrastructure for amounts above 120 megawatts. So that would suggest that any sale or purchase of wind would be in blocks that are, likely no greater than that, because it require more transmission stations to be built. Which is, again, quite close to the total amount that they want to buy. So there seems to be maybe one block of power purchase agreement that is on the table for the wind producers right now. And Everett has kind of gently incorporated that into their proposal. They I think, want 40 or 70, a much smaller amount from the grid, but have a lot of language about being off-grid altogether, with a ridiculous-sounding storage system with no details on it. But a ridiculous-sounding storage system with no details is better than power that they, wouldn't be able to purchase in the first place because it's not being offered. But at this point, looking back to Germany, so they have an auction for their onshore wind going now that just got a 50% uptake rate, and that's bidding at 110 euros a megawatt hour. So that's basically half of German wind producers saying 110 is not economical for us to operate at, and that's with that 45 in hidden subsidies on top of it. So the actual price of wind on a grid might be something like 160 or 170 euro megawatt hour. Referencing that the Ontario piece, I think they figured out the actual cost would be something like 160 for Ontario, but that from 2020 to 2023, it was costing taxpayers $124 a megawatt hour, rather than being a productive source of export revenue or cheap power. So kind of wherever we look, there are really major problems with wind on the grid or as a backstop for industry. We see the backstop and industry problem through hydrogen prices. They're ridiculously high. No one wants it, so that won't work. But even on the grid, even with many tens of billions of dollars of subsidies as Ontario or Germany has done, these are not viable financial assets. They destabilize the grid, and the value of them is really kind of limited to what fuel you have the ability to save. And, for us, the fuel it would save is spilling a bit of water, which is not bad. We can sell that water, and that's, fine and good. But it's not the kind of economy transforming thing I think a lot of people are hoping it would be.
Yeah, I mean, to me, it's all about the blend on the input side. That seems to be the best practice here. If you could have a full reliance on something like 100% of your power came from hydro, that sounds good in concept, but there's also some arguments to be made about some other blended side on the input side really does provide for a more reliable grid, number one, and maybe a cost-effective grid, number two. Chris, anything else quick before I have to get to the break?
I just like to float the idea that one of the arguments against nuclear people make is that it requires a lot of grid-level storage, because you can't just have huge amounts of power all the time if it's in excess. That's sort of where our reservoir hydro becomes a benefit to a potential nuclear fleet, because those are very, very large batteries. That's kind of what makes hydro so expensive to build, is that you're building your storage with it. And there's a lot of, I think there's value to be extracted by layering a small nuclear system fleet, ideally, on top of our hydro, using the reservoir storage as that kind of, that's where you would get your energy arbitrage and the profit opportunity on export. That's where I think we should head as a province. We're a little bit away from that yet, though.
Appreciate the time, Chris. Thanks for the call.
Thank you, Patty. Have a good day.
You too. Bye-bye.